Okay, welcome everybody to the fifth installment of our State of European Business. Today we're going to be focusing on the United Kingdom. The main theme of our discussion today is going to be the topic of following Brexit, why the UK will become the Hong Kong of Europe. So thank you very much for all the people who are attending today, and thank you as well in advance for those that are going to watch the rebroadcast of this event. We're here on the 12th of August, 2020, joined by Tim Sagar. So just to introduce myself and the company, I'm Jeff Lamont, the founder and managing director of Terra Advisors. Terra Advisors is a sales consultancy working across the US, Europe, and the Middle East, helping companies when they're expanding into new territories. Tim is someone that we've known, actually one of the first people I met when I launched the company more than 12 years ago, Tim. We met at I think it was early on in Terminal 5 at Heathrow, right when it opened up. Tim, we've worked on a number of projects together over the last 12 years, probably 5 or 6 projects with different clients who are entering into the European market. Tim has been doing sales consultancy and business development consultancy for more than 20 years, working for about, 25 or 30 companies in that time period. So expertise all across mobile, content, and a bunch of other related fields. He's based just outside of London. And Tim, thanks a lot. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff.
So we're going to cover 2 main topics. The first is what we're calling sort of a country update. For the country update, we're going to look into 3 different areas. One is the health, the second is political, and the third is the economic situation and outlook for the country. So that'll take about 10 minutes of our discussion today. And then for the remaining 15 minutes or so, we will focus in on that theme of why the UK will become the Hong Kong of Europe after Brexit. So Tim is a well-educated and well-informed person, so we're happy to have him here to look into these 3 topics. So we're going to set up the session today as mostly as an interview. Tim is not going to present a PowerPoint or something on his analysis of the United Kingdom, but rather we're just going to talk through a bunch of different topics. So Tim, anything you wanted to say before we get started, or shall we just jump into it?
No, let's jump into it.
Okay, great. So let's start on the first topic of the health situation. So here we are now in middle of August. The world has been facing this pandemic, the coronavirus, for almost 6 months. Started in late January in China. So, it's been about good 5-6 months that we faced it. I think pretty much everyone who's listening today is aware of the challenges in their own country as well as challenges that other countries have faced. The UK was one of the relatively early hit countries by the pandemic, which became quite magnified, let's say, by, first of all, the Prime Minister downplaying things a little bit, but then he himself coming down with the illness and almost actually perishing from it, apparently from the reports. So, Tim, can you just give us a quick overview of what happened over the last sort of 5 months and where things stand today?
Yes, it all goes back to probably the 14th of March. So prior to that, it was all being downplayed and there was a lot of talk about herd immunity. And then on the 14th of March, there was a report made that was estimating that if we continued on the path of getting herd immunity, then there was potentially between 300,000 and 1 million deaths in the UK. And that really shook everybody up. And all of a sudden, we took it seriously, but it wasn't an immediate lockdown. It was like a gradual lockdown. So things like weddings and gatherings and football matches still took place. And it was very personal for myself because my youngest son was getting married on Friday, the 20th of March. So that was a very fraught week as to what's going to happen. And my son was coming in from Spain, and Spain had gone into full lockdown. So there was a lot of family arguments, shall we say, as to whether the wedding should go ahead. Anyway, it did go ahead, but with a much reduced number of attendees. And that was the very last wedding that took place in Reading. So the next morning, the 21st, we went into full lockdown. And my son went back to Spain, to a much more severe lockdown than the UK. In Spain, they could hardly go outside of their apartment. They couldn't even go into the free space of their apartment block. So it was far more severe than the UK. UK, we could still we could go for walks, and we could take exercise and so on. But we were probably, I would say they estimated probably 2 weeks too late in terms of lockdown, and they could have saved many thousands of lives if they'd taken it a little more seriously. So there's been a lot of reproaching, but not too much. But it meant that we were probably the top of the league tables in terms of deaths in Europe for quite some time. But the big factor that affected us was the care homes. So they had a policy where they would put people from hospital and they would send them back into care homes without testing for coronavirus. And that just seeded the deaths in the care homes. So we saw at the peak, not only did we have a lot of COVID-19 deaths, but also the average deaths compared to the 5-year average doubled anyway. So we had a tripling of deaths in care homes, and that resulted in 20,000 deaths. So probably half of all the deaths in the UK all took place in care homes. So that was the biggest mistake that was made in the UK. So now we're bubbling along, probably about 1,000 new cases per day. And in terms of deaths, we're down in the double figures of deaths. And we have a few hotspots, and those hotspots are being treated very aggressively. So we had a hotspot in Leicester, and that was then shut down. So Leicester was shut down, and now Leicester is back to normal levels. And so the latest hotspot is in the north of England, around about the Manchester area in Oldham. And all of a sudden, there's increasing cases. And the problem is, local reports are that people are just not respecting the rules. They're not wearing masks, and they're not refraining from parties and what have you. So I'm expecting that very shortly there will be a complete lockdown of the Manchester area, just to keep things under control.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, thank you for the overview. So it seems the situation is relatively under control. Let's say it's never going to be perfect. So, and I guess that maybe takes us to our second point about the political environment. Different countries have responded differently. Sometimes the opposing parties have come together. Other times the opposing parties have used this as a wedge. Other times there's only one ruler in a country. So how have things looked in the UK?
We have to go back to when we had coalition governments back in 2011, and so that there wouldn't be any calls for votes of no confidence in that with that system, because we were not used to having coalition governments. They introduced the new Parliament Act, a fixed-term Parliament Act. So that meant that you had to have very stringent rules to be able to call an election, and if you didn't, then the term of the Parliament would be fixed at 5 years. That was the first big milestone, and as a result of the Liberal Democrats going into coalition with the Conservatives, they got blamed for a lot of things. And so when it came to the next election, the Liberal Democrats were decimated. And then we went into this situation where the government was on a knife edge and didn't have an overall majority. And so we had this negotiations within negotiations about actually triggering Article 50 to trigger Brexit. So another election was called, and it was quite surprising in that Boris Johnson, he had a very clear message: get Brexit done. Whereas the main opponent, Jeremy Corbyn, he was sitting on the fence. Of course, what they call the red wall of the north, which is in the north of England, where Labour were very, very strong, they were more wanting to have the Brexit. So they were not supporting Jeremy Corbyn because he was just sitting on the fence. He wouldn't say whether he was supporting Brexit or against Brexit. So they voted in droves for the Conservatives, and Boris Johnson then had a landslide majority, which means he's all powerful. He can do what he wants for 5 years. And so, of course, Jeremy Corbyn got kicked into touch, and we now have Keir Starmer, who's the head of the Labour Party, and he used to be the Attorney General, so he's a far more serious leader of the opposition. And so he's putting up a good fight and trying to hold the government in check. And Boris Johnson hasn't done very well. Firstly, he caught coronavirus, and but also in terms of the management, he's perceived as being a bit wishy-washy. He was late with the lockdown, and what he's introduced is really the start, really, of the Brexit, of the breakup of the United Kingdom. So we now have a barrier, a customs barrier with Northern Ireland, and so Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, she, on the other hand, it's always down to the women. The women seem to be managing the coronavirus pandemic better than the men, and her popularity has soared. And would you believe that the people from Northern Ireland actually originated in Scotland? So I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see Northern Ireland joining Southern Ireland, and there'll be a united Ireland, and then Scotland breaking off, and we'll be left with little old England at the end of the day, if Boris Johnson doesn't get his act together.
Okay. Finally, let's move on to the economic. I mean, all the countries in the world have seen an economic decline and a contraction due to the impact of the lockdown and other things that have been caused by the coronavirus. How does it look in the UK? You know, what's the sort of chalking up the numbers of the first half of the year, and then looking forward?
So we followed France's example in terms of when we had the lockdown, then we introduced a furlough scheme. So the furlough scheme is where the government pays 80% of the wages, and it's optional as to whether the company pays the 20% or not. So I think the government was actually paying 9 million people during the period of lockdown, which is quite considerable. So it's been fairly successful. We're now gradually coming out of the lockdown. The lockdown is now flexible, and also the percentage of the wages that the government is paying is reducing. So we're seeing a gradual coming out of the lockdown. So we had 2 months of really probably severe economic hardship, but we've seen a V-shaped recovery in terms of retail sales. So it's V-shaped in that, in fact, the retail sales in the last month were 4% higher than the retail sales in the month the previous year. So we've seen a very big bounce back. And I think companies are taking the opportunity really to reassess and to readjust their businesses, and using COVID as an excuse. They were probably too frightened in certain instances, whereas now this is giving them the opportunity. So, I mean, anecdotally, my wife, she works for Boots opticians, and there in the high street, they had 3 Boots stores in one high street in Reading, and it's just a total overkill. So they're now reducing that, they're rationalizing it, and making appropriate people redundant. So it's really slimming down the business according to what it should be. And my younger son, he working for a distributor. That distributor had just bought a smaller company, and so they're in the process of rationalizing and integrating the 2 companies. They've been able to use the COVID crisis to really reassess everybody's role, and everyone then applies again. Either they lost their job, but they could then apply to all sorts of other jobs within the organisation. And so my son, he lost his job, but he had the process. He went for 3 or 4 interviews, and finally he's got a new revised job. And on top of it, he has a bonus where he gets a 20% pay increase. So all in all, not bad at all. So I think companies generally are using this as an opportunity to really adjust things. But the big change is really accelerating the demise of the high street. Of those retail sales, 40% of those were online. And we're seeing a lot of the big department stores. For instance, there are 2 department stores in Reading, House of Fraser and Debenhams. They're not going to be opening their offices or their shops again. So we'll see an acceleration towards a lot of online sales, a lot of online groceries. There's been a huge increase in the numbers of fleets for online deliveries. So that's precipitated a change that was probably happening gradually, but is going to be more effective. So in terms of the unemployment rate, it was 3.9% before the lockdown. It's still 3.9%, and that's because the 220,000 jobs that have been lost, people have not been applying for those for unemployment benefit. Maybe they are starting to look at other opportunities or become self-employed. Not quite sure, but the Bank of England are now forecasting that by the end of the year, the employment rate will be 7.5%, so almost double what it was pre-crisis. So not as severe, I don't think, and everyone is expecting it the recovery to be a lot faster than they were initially suggesting. So I'm pretty hopeful that even though the GDP has gone down 20%, this is all the historic data, and already since that we've seen GDP increase by 9%. So I think we'll see a much more efficient United Kingdom going forward. So I'm not too concerned.
Okay, good. Thank you for the overview. It leaves us only about 10 minutes here just for our main topic. So we've actually done more on these other topics than the main one, but these have been very interesting and I think enlightening for the people on the call with us today. So let's just jump in on Brexit. I mean, everyone's heard of it. Probably if you don't live in the UK, you're not following the play-by-play each week because it's just too much information to keep up with. So we're about 4 months from the end of the year, 4.5 months. There's certainly some deadline at the end of 2020. So what's the current state of play?
Well, people have lost interest in Brexit. It's no longer a party. So the feeling is we're probably, in terms of all the betting is 50-50 as to whether we will leave with a hard Brexit or whether there'll be a negotiated solution. My own feeling is that, as with all negotiations with the European Union, it will go down to the wire, the very, very last minute before there's an agreement. But it's in both parties, in everybody's interest to reach an agreement, because if there's a no-deal Brexit, then the European Union, on paper, stands to lose a lot more than the United Kingdom, because we buy a lot more goods from the EU than they buy from us. So I'm personally optimistic about an agreement, but there are 2 main areas of contention. One is fishing. So you have to go back to probably just after I was born and the start of the Cod Wars with Iceland. And they went on until I went to university in 1976. And Iceland won those wars. So that was and it's all down to the English national dish, cod and chips. And cod and chips started as a national dish because it was when the railways started, the steam engines, when they arrived, all of a sudden you could transport rapidly fresh fish to the interior of the country. And so whereas not only having fish and chips on the coast, you could have fish and chips everywhere. And so that's how fish and chips became the national dish. Anyway, Now there's now a big contention because a lot of the ports, a lot of the fishing ports were decimated, and the local fishing industries got crucified. We got a very bad deal when we were negotiating the common fisheries policy, and now it's probably an item of national pride. So even though it probably only represents 1.5% of the GDP, it is a matter of principle. And so if you look at the rules for fishing, so you have a 12-mile limit, where in that 12-mile limit only the local vessels can fish. But if you don't have that, then you can have your own fishing limits up to 200 nautical miles outside of your border. So it's a huge difference. And the state of play currently is that 60% of all the fish that's caught in British territory and in UK territorial waters is actually fished by other countries. So it is a huge proportion. And so I think fisheries, there's going to have to be some concessions from the European Union, because it won't be a question of proportionality in terms of losses. It's a matter of principle. The other one is the level playing field, which is really where this comes in. Already there isn't a level playing field because the UK is far more cost effective in terms of setting up businesses. But it's all down to the having the right level of competition. So those are the two issues that divide the negotiations, and those are the two that are going to come down to the wire at the end of the day.
Got it. I mean, I guess the question, so we only have about 5 minutes left. So in 1 minute for each part, if no deal is reached, what are things going to look like? And if a deal is reached, what are things going to look like?
But in terms of the UK being the ideal place to have a bridgehead into Europe, whichever way, it's going to be positive. After Brexit, the pound took a 25% hit. So already we're far more competitive than pre-Brexit in terms of the cost of setting up a bridgehead into Europe. So I think just generally the labour market is just so much more flexible. It goes back to we can thank Margaret Thatcher in the first recession with Margaret Thatcher. Then unemployment started rising after the economy picked up. With the second recession, the unemployment started to decrease before we came out of the recession. So thanks to Margaret Thatcher, we have a very, very flexible workforce, and that stands us in very good stead for being a competitor, a good place to as a bridgehead into Europe. If there's no deal, then the pound will be hit even harder, and so it will be even cheaper to have a location in the UK. If there's a deal, then it'll be a lot smoother, and the implications will not be as difficult to cope with.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, most of the clients we work with are in the IT area. They're not in the manufacturing area where they're actually making hard goods that would be landed in the UK and then need to again be landed into another territory. Mm. So if you're talking about the knowledge worker, the UK, you don't see it losing a beat, and the fact that it is actually 25% cheaper to establish there than 3 years ago or 4 years ago, that's a big advantage for foreign companies.
Yeah.
Got it. And we talked about in the title of this webinar, we talked about why it'll become the Hong Kong of Europe. So can you just explain sort of when we spoke about this some months ago or a couple months ago, we came up with that theme. What's the analogy? And of course, there's been a lot of, just exactly now in the news, there's a lot of things going on in Hong Kong with China taking more of an active role in the press and in the policing and everything else. But in general, if you look at Hong Kong over the last 50 years or certainly the last 30 years, what's the analogy?
Well, I think Hong Kong is going to be moving to the UK.
Okay, well, that's true. That's a separate meeting.
So I think we can expect something like 3.5 million Hong Kong people to move to the UK. So we're going to have lots of expertise. The other concerning thing, though, is that after the Brexit vote, then there was a 30% increase in migration from the UK into the European Union. 15% of it took place straight away, and another 15% over time. So one of those was my son, who now lives in Barcelona, and that accelerated his naturalization into the Spanish market. So there is a bit of a concern that there's been a bit of a brain drain to Europe since the Brexit vote.
Yes. But the analogy, though, that we discussed was in regards to the fact that it's an island. Hong Kong is an island off the coast of China, which is still a great launching point for doing business all across Asia.
Yeah.
Even though it's not officially part of China, and it is part of China, but it's still separate, and it's not part of all the other countries in the Far East that are associating with Hong Kong, right?
And so the UK's ambition is to have free trade around the world. So the UK was built on trade. That's how we did it with the British Navy. The Bank of England was actually the company that financed the British fleet to the British Navy to defend our trade routes. And that's the origin of the Bank of England. So I think we're going back to being a place easily to do business with most countries around the world. And escape from the restrictions of the European Union.
Understood. On that topic, escaping from the restrictions of the European Union, if the vote was taken again today, what's the smart money say in the UK if it would have passed Brexit? Would it have gone through or not? If now they know after 4 years what sort of all this turmoil has been.
If you had the vote again today, we would stay in the European Union.
Would say.
The polls say that we would, and there are even polls now as to how quickly we would re-enter and rejoin the European Union. So if at the end of the 5-year term, if it's been a complete disaster and all these promises of gold at the end of the rainbow don't happen, then it could be that the Conservatives will be defeated. We'll have a Labour government who will be pro-European, and we will then re-enter the European market. So Boris Johnson has another 3 years to prove what he said was actually true. And if it's not, then I think we will go back into the European Union.
Yep. Good. Well, so we're out of time. We can wrap up on that point. So Tim, thank you very much for your insights and all the information. I think it's quite enlightening for the audience, and like I said, the people that are going to listen to this at a later time. So with that, thanks a lot to everybody who joined today, and Tim, thanks to you, and the best to everybody, and best of health and everything. So thanks again.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.